Доброе утро, Вашингтон, добрый день,
Good morning,
добрый вечер в
Washington.
Москве.
Good afternoon and
Дорогие
good evening in
друзья, Гайдарский
Moscow.
форум
Dear
продолжается,
friends,
второй день
Gaidar
Гайдарского
Forum
форума,
continues.
и
It's our
я с
second
огромным
day.
удовольствием
And it
хочу
is my
представить
special pleasure
Kristalinu
to introduce to you Kristalina
исполнительного
Georgieva,
директора
Managing
Международного
Director of
валютного
International
фонда,
Monetary Fund.
человек, с которым мы знакомы, могу
This
сказать, дружим вот
person
уже,
is
наверное, 20 лет.
someone
Добрый день,
we
Кристалина.
know each
Кристалина
other
Георгиева
with for more than 20 years, I guess. We are friends. She represented the World Bank in Russia. She was deputy chairman of the European Commission. By the way, she was awarded the Russian Friendship Order by the Russian president. And I'm so glad that Kristalina agreed to join us for this conversation. Hi there.
Здравствуйте, Володя. С Новым
Good
годом.
afternoon, Vladimir. Happy New Year. Happy Old New Year.
Желаю хорошего здоровья.
And I would like to wish you good health, first of all.
Of course, very happy to join you again at the Gaidar Forum.
Спасибо большое. Кристалина прекрасно говорит по-русски, но мы договорились для баланса, что я буду говорить по-русски.
Kristalina speaks Russian perfectly well, but to have a balance of forces, we agreed that she's going to speak English, I will speak Russian. This morning we had a session where we discussed approximately the same topics. I was the moderator. We had Minister of Finance Anton Siluanov, Minister of Economic Development Maxim Reshetnikov, and Chairman of the Bank of Russia, Elvira Nabiulina. And we agreed that first we'll talk about the economic growth prospects, then we'll talk about the international agenda, and we discussed the same in a different context this morning. So let's start with one important question of principle. What will happen to the economic growth? I'm not asking you about rebound. I'm not asking about growth to come back to the pre-crisis level. But what will happen next? That's my question. About 10 years ago, in 2008, 2009, there was a structural financial crisis. We all dealt with it at that time. But after that, something miraculous happened. We overcame the structural crisis without structural reforms. So there was no positive destruction then, according to Schönpeter. So we had structural crisis without structural reforms. And we noticed the central banks and governments of the leading advanced countries could very well cope with the crisis, not to have the same catastrophe of 1930s or problems we had in 1970s, but the growth was very slow first. So after such a crisis, there is a number of possible way outs. Number one, structural reforms. So after the crisis, we will have to reach the growth we had in the beginning of 2000s. Number two, slow growth for a long time, which was secular stagnation. And option number three is probably we measure something wrongly, or we measure the wrong parameters, or maybe the growth assessment, like we performed it since late 1930s when GDP was introduced as a notion. Maybe now it's an old approach. Now many products lose their value so quickly. Now with Uber, e-books and other things which are much cheaper than it used to be in the past. So what will happen to the economic growth, do you think? Can we hope for high growth?
Volodya, great question. But first thing first, and it is to concentrate our efforts in this truly consequential year on a durable exit from the health crisis and from the recession it caused everywhere. And I just want to bring the attention of our audience that we are in an unprecedented race between the virus and the vaccines. We know that in parts of the world, it is likely that the vaccines would win the race somewhere by the middle of this year, but it's not going to be everywhere. And we have to be concentrated on bringing the world together to make sure that we don't get divergent outcomes, divergent pathways to recovery, which will hold the whole world back. And as we do that, we do need to look into your question. What kind of growth paradigm we are going to have after the pandemic? How would the world look like on the other side? Obviously, I'm in the camp of those who believe that going back to 2019 is not going to serve us well. We have to not reproduce the economy of yesterday, but build the economy of tomorrow. And to do so, we have to start from recognizing what were the problems in 2019. Vladimir, when I took over as managing director of the IMF in October 2019, I gave a speech in which I talked about what? Low productivity, low growth, rising inequalities, and a looming climate crisis. None of these problems have gone away. So can we take a brave step towards focus on the quality of growth and on sharing the benefits of growth more equitably? And can we think about transforming how we measure economic success? This is going to be our task over 2021 and beyond. So let me give you my sort of starting proposition on this question. When you look at the global financial crisis you refer to, we did learn a lesson from this crisis, and we did make a systemic change. We concentrated on the resilience of the banking system, and for fairness to everybody who have worked on it, that has been successful, and we reap up the benefits of a more resilient banking system today. Good, but not good enough. We are in a more shock-prone world, so one priority when we talk about quality of growth is to build resilience in a more comprehensive manner so we can withstand shocks, be more agile as they're going to inevitably come. And when you think about the shortcomings of this narrow definition of resilience, banking sector resilience, they are for the naked eye to see. We need more resilient people that are skilled and educated and can adjust to changing labor markets, that are healthy, and that rely on a social protection at the time of need. And we saw where countries had it, it paid off. We do need a resilient planet. We have been running the resources of our planet to the ground. That cannot continue. And I'm very encouraged by the awareness that this transformation to a green, low-carbon, climate-resilient economy is now prioritized much more. And by the way, moving there is going to help us with a big problem from this crisis, which is unemployment for low-skilled workers, in particular for young people, for women, that a massive investment in climate resilience can address. And we also need to think of resilience of our economic decision-making that is more oriented towards well-being of people. It is another feature of 2019 that is worth remembering. Protests from Paris to Santiago to Beirut, people were on the street. So how we shift our economic model to be more oriented towards quality of life and quality of growth is going to be the task of policymakers in 21, 22, 23, probably beyond. And as your question indicated, we ought to rethink how we measure economic progress in the process. Not a new discussion. It has been with us for quite some time. Beyond GDP is a train of economic thought that has been, producing some good results. But it is an unfinished agenda. At the IMF, we take it to heart. And I will finish by sharing with you 3 streams of work we pursue. One is to improve how we measure the traditional indicator for growth, GDP. Like many around the world, we have been bothered by the fact that the digital economy is booming, but productivity is lagging behind. We did some research for the US. Our colleagues calculated that we are probably missing at least 0.3% of productivity growth because we are not capturing the digital economy well. We don't know how to capture products that do not have price, and yet we are seeing big expansion exactly of these products in the digital space. So this work needs to continue. Secondly, we have to think at the national accounts and continue to expand what national accounts measure. Again, traditional set of indicators, but imperfect, and they need improvement. But the third avenue is the most exciting and most interesting. How can we measure well-being? How can we get to a point when policymakers are informed for their decisions by a more comprehensive set of measures? And there, as you know, Volodya, my previous organization, the World Bank, has invested in more than a decade of research in measuring the wealth of nations. Not the flow, but how the stock of wealth expands. And they have come up with very useful indication of wealth that discovered something that should have been commonsensical, but it took us a while to get to that. When you look at wealth, the physical wealth, the physical capital, the financial wealth, they dwarf in comparison to the natural capital, they dwarf in comparison to the most important component of wealth, and it is us, it is people. Human capital, once you get into the trouble of measuring it, is 2/3 of the wealth of our planet. And not surprisingly, richer countries have much more of it, and poor countries much less of it. So shifting our attention towards investing in people, understanding better what drives productivity, and then making sure that the benefits of growth are more widely shared, a big agenda for all of us.
Kristalina, спасибо. Очень важный ответ, развернутый ответ.
Thank you so much for such a detailed and important answers to my question. I would like to underscore on my own behalf is that the experience of my country, of my generation, shows that economic growth is possible without growth of well-being. We saw that in 1980s when the well-being was declining, while the growth rate was up. While in Japan, when the well-being is growing, while the economics are stagnating. Even though these two notions, these two areas are interlinked. You referred to your speech in October 2019 when you took this position in IMF. I read your speech, And
Кристина Лагард,
you were backing, you, based on the Christine Lagarde quotation of Kennedy, you said that if you want to mend the roof, you shouldn't do that when it's sunny. And if you see there's rain coming, you have to mend the roof even quicker. So the question is, what are you doing now in the IMF? Are you already restoring the roof or not yet? And what does that mean, restore the roof, repair the roof? Does it mean create macroeconomic conditions for growth or other things?
You wouldn't be surprised that when the rain that the health crisis brought upon us started, our first and immediate preoccupation was to put plastic on the roof to protect from leaking, especially in places where the danger was more severe, in other words, in more vulnerable countries. So what we did in 2020 was to concentrate on financial lifelines to provide countries with fiscal space to take care of their health workers and to protect the most vulnerable people and vulnerable parts of the economy. We have done more than ever, faster than ever. 83 countries received support from the IMF. Out of it, majority, 78 countries got emergency financing. But at the same time, we do concentrate on what are the policies that are necessary right now and are necessary for the future. In other words, fix the roof for the long run. In terms of policies for right now, very unusual for the IMF, Volodya. Starting already in March, I would go out and I would say, please spend. Spend as much as you can and then spend a little bit more.
But keep receipts. Nevertheless, you said, but keep
for monetary policy accommodation and fiscal policies that protect the economy from collapse at a time when we are on purpose restricting both production and consumption. And I want to praise Russia, the central bank and the Ministry of Finance in a synchronized manner did exactly that. They put a protection for the economy. Why was that important? And it's still important. We still have to be very careful not to withdraw support prematurely, because if we do so, we would have a wave of bankruptcies and structural unemployment that would be very difficult to reverse. So that part of the job was done. But now we are in the second part of fighting with the worst recession since the Great Depression. And it is to turn the page for the economy. And I want to start from a very important observation in this crisis. Similar to people with weak immune systems being affected by the virus more severely, countries with weak fundamentals suffer the economic crisis much more dramatically. And vice versa, countries like Russia that built strong fundamentals are more able to sustain the shock that has come. So our first message is strong fundamentals matter. Having buffers for harsh times matters. Having agile labor markets matters. Having product markets that are open and allow competition, so strength is being built. This matters. All the things that you, I know you have been promoting for Russia and for the world, but that is not going to be sufficient to take a turn towards a highly competitive, smart green and equitable growth for the future. That would take proactive policies, and it would take all of us working actually more together than less. So what are we right now engaged on at the fund? One, we strongly recommend for governments to put in place fiscal push that would generate faster transition to uniformly accessible digital economy and to an economy that is low carbon, climate resilient, knowing that this, if you don't do it with this speed of change, you are going to be falling behind. We are recommending it with very clear focus on where jobs are likely to come, because automation, digitalization does have a fallback, and it is for low-skilled workers, it is incredibly difficult to hang on jobs. So creating jobs that are in infrastructure, especially a climate resilient infrastructure, for many countries, huge opportunities to build green mobility, clean mobility, to get the economy to be able to shift to what is going to be the future. Investments in the ability for everybody to be integrated in this digital world. They are also job-creating investments. Secondly, we are very, very concerned about inequality. Volodya, the IMF has done research in the past that says after a pandemic, inequality grows and it stays high for years. After SARS, after H1N1, after Zika, this is what happened. And we are already seeing a very significant danger of increasing in inequality because of the pandemic. Who is hardest hit? I mentioned it before, I want to repeat it. Low-skilled, women, young people. And unless we are thinking of very massively revamping fiscal policies, and that is taxation and how money is being used to buffer that danger of growing inequalities, we are going to be in trouble. And the protests of 2019 are bound to return very massively. And last but not least, we look at the necessity for international cooperation. Why? Because if we act together, of course, on the health front, by making sure everybody is vaccinated, so we reduce the divergence in recoveries, but more importantly, on this push for digital green growth of the future, we are going to achieve much more with the same investment. In fact, the staff of the IMF calculated that a coordinated G20 fiscal stimulus in green infrastructure, if it is done in that coordinated manner, would deliver 2/3 more in growth enhancement than if each country acts on its own. So we, as an institution of 190 members, we are proud with what we have done, keep the world together. The synchronized policy response to the crisis, which was amazing. We got so much done so fast to stabilize the world economy, was also helped by this platform that we offer to our members. An interesting fact, Volodya, in 2020, we actually grew as an institution. We got a new member, Andorra joined the IMF. symbolically, I take it to mean exactly that. We are in this together. We can only together deal with the challenges in front of us. And looking into 21, we are determined to offer the analytics and the networking opportunities, the platform for collective action that would deal with the tail impact of this crisis, would help us to make this transition more quality, more attention to quality than quantity of growth, more equitable growth, and will help us to also keep the world together, that we don't end up with reversal of some of the great victories of the last decades: reduction in poverty, reduction in hunger, conversion in standards of living of the countries of this world.
Kristalina, спасибо, но у нас уже завершается
Thank you so
время.
much. Unfortunately, our time is running out.
Хочу завершить нашу
I
встречу
would like to
еще
wind
одной
up
цитатой из
our
Kristalины
meeting
Georgievой.
by another
Потому что
quotation
еще
from
одну вещь,
Kristalina
которую вы сказали,
Georgieva,
очень важную
because you said a very
в
important
минувшем
thing
году,
that you
это
said last year.
as you said,
Spend,
but keep receipts.
but keep receipts.
Тратьте, но сохраняйте чеки. И мне кажется...
Thank you for bringing this up. Indeed, when I say spend, the second part of the sentence would be, but keep the receipts. Accountability cannot be lost in this crisis.
И мне кажется, что одной из проблем, которой придется заниматься, это все-таки выплата по счетам.
I think one of the problems we will have to discuss and tackle now is also paying the debts. Russia likes scolding its economists, its economy, but the logic shows that over the past 20 years, Russia learned to pay its debts and not allow its debts to grow exponentially. And actually, this really makes us flexible, maneuverable, and be a partner, but not a customer or client of IMF, which is important for economic growth, right? Kristalina, thank you so much for this friendly chat, and we are looking forward to host you here in person at our academy. Thank you.